Please, all of the speakers, please turn on your camera all along the meeting for the whole time, because we have to pin your screen up to the live scene. So, yeah.
Connection is stable. So Shruti, also, I think we've got 2 minutes. You can start also inviting people to the event.
All right, so I'm letting people in. All the best. Yeah. Good to go.
All the speakers, please turn on your camera for the whole meeting.
I'm trying to see the view here. So I see also, hi, David, you're also here. David, thank you so much.
Yeah, moderators, speakers, and sign interpreters.
Great to be here.
All the best to everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time and being here. We start in
Campbell, Miss Campbell, FC.
Yes, we'll.
Welcome to the high-level event, Women's Rights, Gender Equality, and the Future of Biodiversity, organized by the Government of Costa Rica and Women for Biodiversity, with the support of the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, WWF, and partners IUCN, Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Fundación Ambiente y Recursos Naturales, and International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific. My name is Pamela Castillo, lead of the Technical Secretariat of the Gender Parity Initiative of Costa Rica. Today, I have the honor to co-moderate this great event alongside with Maya Hakayama, Senior Presenter for BBC Africa. Before we begin, I will run quickly through some logistics. We will have interpretation in the following languages: English, Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, French, and Sign Language. Please select the language of your preference using the global sign at the bottom of your screen. Participants can ask questions to any speaker or panelist during the event in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, indicating your name, country, and for who the question is addressed. They will be answered directly in the chat. Let's begin. Today, humanity faces 4 interrelated crises: health, climate, biodiversity, and the socio-economic crisis. This reality calls upon us to urgently reflect on the current economic development model, its impact on nature, and the social gaps caused by it. But we cannot stay reflecting. This is the time to make decisions, generate solutions, and implement different actions that promote collaborative leadership and put nature and human rights at the forefront of the development agenda. To achieve this, it is necessary to design and implement innovative solutions that contribute to close structural gaps deepened by the effects of the pandemic and without leaving anyone behind. In this regard, the CDB post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework represents an opportunity to not just recognize the historical contribution of women to conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity, but to agree on firm actions that will accelerate the inclusion of girls and women as leaders of environmental solutions that became engines of an inclusive and equitable economic reactivation. The challenges are complex and require true commitment of all stakeholders. This is why the main objectives of these events are to provide an introduction to gender and environmental linkages, emphasize the importance of including gender-responsive actions into environmental policy spaces, in particular to the CDB post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, inspire women in the field and increase their visibility, inspire public and private sector leaders and donors to invest in nature-based solutions and support women's leadership initiatives. We have the honor to have the participation of important leaders during this event. A special welcome to la Honorable Vicepresidenta de Costa Rica, Epsi Campbell, la Honorable Vicepresidenta de Uruguay, Beatriz Argimón, Ms. Elizabeth Murmuna, Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Mr. Basil Banhart, co-chair of the CBD Open-Ended Working Group for the Post-2020, Mr. Dave Boyd, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, Ms. Ray, Director of Women for Biodiversity, and Maria Schultz, Senior Policy Specialist and Coordinator for Biodiversity and Ecosystem for the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. Without further ado, we will start the event with a video message from Ms. Murmuna.
Dear colleagues, greetings to you all in attendance. It is indeed my pleasure to speak with you all today on this paramount theme targeted for this event. I send you warm greetings from Kunming, China, as we begin the first part of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which will address, among other key issues, the development and the importance of implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In this regard, I welcome the opportunity to bring to your attention the role of gender in the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and its future implementation. Already, at the last Conference of the Parties, the precondition to engage gender was acknowledged by the parties. Not surprising, they already agreed then that the process to develop the framework has to uphold appropriate representation, particularly of women and girls, to guarantee it being gender responsive by systematically integrating gender perspectives into the process. This is no longer business as usual approach. To ensure gender perspectives are fully considered requires engaging women and girls from the grassroots to the global level. Moreover, it means providing opportunities for women and men from diverse cultures, races, ethnicities, and ages to have an equal voice in decisions that affect their future. The COVID-19 pandemic makes it all clear how those who are most marginalized, most often women and girls, suffer the most brunt of the crisis and impact. These include insecure employment, increased burden of caregiving, and heightened risk of gender violence. Signs of impact of the combined biodiversity, climate, and pollution crises for peoples around the world are already feasible, although the full impacts are yet to be assessed. The first draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, specifically a Target 21, acknowledges and recognizes the necessity of appropriate recognition of gender equality, women's empowerment, youth, gender-responsive approaches, and full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in its implementation. Accordingly, the target proposes to ensure equitable and effective participation in decision-making related to biodiversity by indigenous peoples and local communities, and respect their rights over land, territories, and resources, as well as by women and girls and youth. The target further provides a significant entry point for concerted action to advance the engagement of women and girls in all their diversity in decision-making processes at all levels. Nonetheless, we must recognize that action on gender cannot be regulated only by one target. It must be understood to be a cross-cutting issue requiring cross-cutting approach to support the effective implementation of all agreed goals and targets. The transformative changes required involve revisiting our relationship with nature and changing the way we relate to each other, including all those recognized under Target 21. Without enabling the equal and effective engagement of all gender, particularly women and girls, in taking decisions and actions to conserve, sustainably manage, and use, and including equitably share the benefits accruing from the biodiversity, we cannot expect to achieve the goals and the targets of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. It cannot be up to a select few to determine the future of the majority. It requires all of us and all of you. I welcome your efforts in putting a spotlight on gender and the roles and the needs of women for biodiversity. Thank you, and I wish you fruitful discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Murmuna. Ahora tengo el honor de invitar a la vicepresidenta de la República, Beatriz Argimón, quien también es presidenta de la Asamblea y presidenta del Senado de Uruguay. La señora Beatriz Argimón se convirtió en el 2019 en la primera mujer electa vicepresidenta de su país. Fue diputada por 2 periodos consecutivos, directora del Instituto Nacional de Menores. Además, es fundadora de la bancada bicameral femenina y de la Fundación Álvarez Caldeiro Barcia. Sea muy bienvenida, vicepresidenta. Le dejo el espacio para que nos brinde sus palabras de enmarque político y de la importancia de incluir expresamente a las mujeres en el marco mundial de la biodiversidad post-2020. Vicepresidenta, el espacio es suyo.
Un placer estar en esta conferencia, a la cual le asigno una gran importancia. Primero, agradecer a quienes la convocan, porque es verdad que esfuerzos de estas características para hacer notorio algunos aspectos que a esta altura parece increíble no tenerse en cuenta pese a todos los esfuerzos. Realmente es importante agradecer quienes están dispuestos a organizarnos y a darnos la oportunidad de tener este marco de intercambios. Así que luego de agradecerle a la organización y darle a todos mis saludos, quiero básicamente empezar por manifestar mi compromiso en todo lo que tiene que ver con la necesaria interpretación de una vez por todas que no puede haber acciones que tengan que ver con la biodiversidad, que por lo tanto tiene que ver con nuestra propia vida, nuestro entorno, y lo que queremos dejarle a las futuras generaciones sin la intervención directa de las mujeres y las niñas. La verdad resulta a esta altura, luego de todos los esfuerzos que la comunidad internacional ha estado realizando respecto a no solo tener claro que la Declaración de los Derechos Humanos admite obviamente una única interpretación y es la igualdad entre hombres y mujeres, cómo se ha tenido que ir manifestando también la comunidad internacional en términos de hacer visible la inequidad que existe en nuestras sociedades respecto a la necesaria igualdad entre hombres y mujeres. A eso le agregamos que a esta altura es inadmisible que se tomen medidas en todo lo que tiene que ver con el cuidado del ambiente, con la diversidad, sin el liderazgo de las mujeres, a nivel macro, pero fundamentalmente a nivel local y de las comunidades. ¿Por qué decimos esto? Porque obviamente si hay alguien que le preocupa todo lo que tiene que ver con la biodiversidad, la necesidad de mantener permanentemente ese rol educador que las mujeres tenemos en nuestras sociedades, es precisamente el tema del futuro que dejamos para las nuevas generaciones. El protagonismo de las mujeres en nuestras comunidades, en la sociedad local, es realmente a esta altura del siglo XXI incomprensible que no se tenga en cuenta. Por eso, cuando estamos hablando de acciones que tienen que ver con la salud de nuestra comunidad, con el ambiente en general, con la alimentación, porque de todo esto se trata, es inadmisible que a esta altura no se nos involucre en la toma de decisiones nacional y local a las mujeres y también a las niñas. Por eso estos encuentros son importantes, mucho más teniendo en cuenta que hemos tenido que afrontar un flagelo como es la lucha contra el COVID-19 en lo macro. Globalmente hemos tenido que salir a enfrentarnos a esta pandemia y todos sabemos que también es difícil salir de la misma en términos de los efectos que la misma ha dejado. Por eso las medidas tienen que tomarse más rápido, las decisiones tienen que no demorarse, y mucho menos cuando se trata de la biodiversidad. Por lo que yo quiero cerrar mi apertura diciendo que ratifico mi compromiso en lo que tiene que ver con el trabajo en pos de un involucramiento inmediato de las mujeres en todos estos temas y fortalecer los liderazgos de nosotras, tanto a nivel nacional como a nivel local, porque ya no puede seguir existiendo esa ausencia de las mujeres en un tema que viene con nosotras mismas desde épocas de nuestros ancestros. Así que quiero ratificar mi compromiso, estoy a las órdenes, sepan ustedes que muy especialmente en este tema pueden contar conmigo. Un gran abrazo desde aquí, desde el sur de América del Sur.
Muchísimas gracias, señora vicepresidenta, por sus declaraciones en favor de la inclusión de las mujeres, por su liderazgo y por su tiempo de estar hoy aquí alzando la voz por todas las mujeres del mundo. Muchas gracias. Now, I will invite Ms. Ray, who will provide us with an introduction to the importance of understanding and taking steps to address gender environmental linkages in order to meet the twin goals of meeting the objectives of the CBD post-2020, as well as for women's empowerment and gender equality. A special welcome, Ms. Ray. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pamela. And it's a wonderful, wonderful event to have put together and see some wonderful participants and everybody. So thank you so much. So I will begin with a little bit about the CBD and how it is really linked with the gender. So the Convention on the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity's preamble text, recognizes the vital role that women play in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and affirms the need for the full participation of women in the implementation of the convention. Subsequently, the general principle for the program of work on the implementation of Article 8J of the convention calls for the full and effective participation of women and indigenous and local communities. The CBD was also the first of the Rio Conventions to have adopted a gender plan of action in 2008, making it the first multilateral environmental agreement to do so, and updated the Gender Plan of Action in 2014, which we also very well know as the Gender Plan of Action 2015 to 2020. Consistent with the principle of gender responsiveness in the preparatory process for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in COP14 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt in 2018, gender equality and the role of women in the implementation of the convention was proposed as an overarching principle for the post-2020 framework. The first draft of the post-2020 GBF, published in July this year, proposed 21 targets, from which target 21 mentions women. However, it is crucial that gender considerations are addressed throughout the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, including in the principles, objectives, implementation, financing, monitoring, reporting, and review for the full realization of the 2050 vision. This is also needed to ensure that both the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action are aligned and are complementary to each other to address and ensure that women and girls equal access, ownership and control over their lands and territories and resources, and the full and effective engagement at all levels of policy and decision-making related to biodiversity. The CBD COP15, which was initially planned for last October and now being organized in two parts. The first part, one, actually just opened today in Kunming, from where our CBD Executive Secretary was conveying her message from in Kunming, China. So it opened today officially and will go on until October 15th. This will be followed by a second part, which will take place at the end of April next year in Kunming, China, in person, where the post-2020 GBF will be adopted along with the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action. Proposing gender equality and the role of women as an overarching principle requires considerations of how these issues would be addressed within the framework and its implementation. So today's dialogue aims to enrich these discussions in building momentum and paving ways forwards for women's rights, gender equality, and the future of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. Now I turn to you, Maya, to moderate the dialogue panel with our special panelists. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for that introduction. My name is Maya Hayakawa. A good evening to you all from this part of the world. I am a senior presenter at BBC Africa, and I am absolutely honored to moderate this session. The discussion will be divided into two parts. First of all, we'll start off with the gender and biodiversity general context, and then we will wind up with taking a closer look and delving really deep into the gender equality segment. But before we get into the discussion, I'd like to briefly introduce my panelists. First up, we have the current Vice President of Costa Rica, Her Excellency Epsi Campbell Barr. She is the first Black woman in Latin America to be elected Vice President. Vice President Barr has been a human rights and environmental activist long before she decided to join politics, and she co-founded the network of Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Latin American women in 1992 to highlight the unique struggles of Black women. She also served as a member of parliament in two different terms, from 2002 to 2006 and 2014 to 2018. And in 2016, Her Excellency was a member of the advisory panel for the UNDP's 2016 Human Development Report for Latin America and the Caribbean, titled Multidimensional Progress, Wellbeing Beyond Income, and coordinated the 2016 meeting of parliamentarians and political leaders of African descent of Americas and the Caribbean. Vice President Barr is particularly concerned with human rights, issues related to women, indigenous and Afro-descendant people, poverty, social development, and the environment. Thank you so much. Also on the panel, we have Ms. Rai, the Director of Women for Biodiversity. She had spoken on earlier, just to give a bit of context, but she is a women's rights and environmental rights advocate. She also works on policy advocacy and research on the intersection of gender equality and women and girls' rights and environmental justice through active participation, information sharing, and inputs into the policy space on biodiversity and environment-related processes. Welcome, Ms. Rai. Also, we have David Boyd, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Environment. He's also an Associate Professor of Law, Policy, and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. Boyd is also the author of 10 books, including The Rights of Nature, which was published back in 2017, The Optimist Environmentalist in 2015, and The Environmental Rights Revolution in 2012. Thank you so much for being here, David, and also for your contribution to the conversation. And last but not least, we have Mr. Basil, the co-chair of the CBD Open-Ended Working Group 3 for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. He has over 27 years of experience working in Canada's Environment Department, and also in addition to this, being Canada's CBD focal point, his roles included Director General of Biodiversity and Partnerships and Director of Population Conservation and Management of the Canadian Wildlife Service, the chair of CITES Elephant Working Group, and CBD discussions on Indigenous knowledge and repatriation, as well as co-chair of the International Joint Commission on Great Lakes Water Quality Board and Director of the Meteorological Service of Canada. Quite a CV over there. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight and jump into the discussion. Part one is looking at the general context of gender and biodiversity. For those who may not understand what the post-2020 biodiversity framework is all about, and also for those taking a look at what is different about this new framework in protecting the planet's biodiversity. So I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Basil. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is a new global framework that is looking to be adopted next year at the CBD COP15 in order to protect the planet's biodiversity. Yet, when we look at the previous targets that we had from the last one, they weren't really met, due to various factors. The question on many minds is, what will be the key elements needed to ensure achieving the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature? And what are some of the lessons that we've learned from the previous plans that you see can be adopted in this new framework?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you. Can you hear me well? Signal if you can. Yes, okay. Lesson learned and what's going to be different and what we're trying to do different, and particularly one lesson learned that is relevant to this group. The previous framework was seen as the framework of the CBD focal point, the Minister of the Environment. What we realize and what we're trying to do is success is going to be there if all parts of society are engaged. So we're trying to build a framework for all, not only a framework for the Minister of the Environment, not only a framework for the whole of government, but one that includes every part of society, from business to finance to civil society, and obviously women. So that's one big difference. The other ones, and you will want to focus on that too, is to set up realistic targets. And that's trying to find that fine balance between reaching the objective, so doing what we need to do, but also trying to be realistic and have in place targets that people can actually implement. And that's where your group is having a very important role in terms of implementation. So we want to have a framework that is not a piece of paper. If I work very well with Tina and others, and we do great work and come out with a great plan, but that plan stays on the shelf, it's only going to be a piece of paper. What we need is action and implementation. So let me focus on the three aspects where I see a very important role for gender. One, on negotiation. Two, on the GBF itself. And three, on implementation. Coming back to the first one, I see a very important role for women, but they have to have not only the role, but the capacity. And I've been very, very pleased. Last week, I participated in the training of female negotiator in French-speaking countries for climate. And they asked that I come to talk about biodiversity, because often those ladies are the same one negotiating on the biodiversity side, and they were already making the links that we're having trouble making as an institution. So how can we replicate those training and those opportunities to give the capacity enabling women in every part of society to be part of those discussions? Second, having a role and a place in the negotiation, and I think we have made probably a lot more in the CBD than in many other conventions, but that doesn't mean that we got to stop. We got to continue and we got to go further. Second, on the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework itself, I was listening very, very carefully to the presentation made by Tina, where she talked the role of women and girls is not just one target. It has to be through the whole framework. And we have it in several places, in the preambular paragraph, in the targets, at the back. But is it enough? Is it well done? Is it what you're looking for? We tried our best with Francis and with the team, but we're waiting for you to tell us how we can make that better. That's a very important part. And then finally, at the implementation stage, at the national level, at the local level, how can we translate those targets into action plan, national action plan, local action plans that are relevant and engage you and engage all gender in a way that maximizes the outcome? So that is a little bit the three message I wanted to leave with you. The one on the lesson learned and the fact we need the frameworks, that is a framework for all. And that's a notion where we're going to need your leadership and we're going to need your engagement, because that's a new concept, and naturally there are people discussing that. Thank you very much. Back to you, Maya.
Thank you. I love how you've highlighted just the importance of looking at realistic targets and being able to implement these targets. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. I'd like now to move over to our next speaker, Mr. Boyd. From the perspective of the right to a healthy environment, How would you describe the link between women's rights, gender equality, and biodiversity? How do they intersect and interact with each other?
Well, thanks very much, Maya. And let me just say thank you for the invitation to join you today. It's really a genuine honor, and this is such a vitally important topic. I really want to start by sharing some super exciting and relevant news from the UN Human Rights Council here in Geneva, which last Friday recognized for the first time at the global level that everyone, everywhere, has the fundamental human right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And what's really interesting is this effort was led by amazing women from all over the world, including Costa Rica's ambassadors, Carolina de Vandes Aguilar, Shara Duncan Villalobos, Slovenia's ambassadors, Anita Pipan and her predecessor, Sabina Stadler, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, Inger Anderson from the UN Environment Program, civil society leaders, including Astrid Puentes, Kristen Cordero, Sandra Epalratian, Chiara Liwori, Lucy McKernan, and many, many more. It was a process driven by these amazing women. And the right to a healthy environment is critical in this context because not only does it include clean air, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainably produced food, a safe climate, non-toxic environments where people can live, work, study, and play, but also healthy ecosystems and biodiversity. And while this new Human Rights Council resolution is important for everyone, I believe it's particularly important for women